Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Raquel Garbers. She is a visiting executive at the Centre for International Governance and Innovation from Canada's Department of National Defence. So let's turn to China specifically now, although we've already addressed it a little bit. But you mentioned in an article that I read recently that it's an economic war that Canada is engaged in with China. What does that mean exactly?
So I think I'd like to set the context for that and tell you how the West itself provided the opening for China to pioneer its economic warfare. Effectively, at the end of the Cold War, the Allies were feeling really secure in the United States' unrivaled power, and at the same time, feeling a little bit tired of the investments they were having to make in defense for the last 50 years. And so, into that mindset, you had a group of foreign policy and economic elites who came along and offered them a new theory of international affairs. And what they effectively said to them was interdependence is the path to riches and peace. And the theory was this: if you embrace the hostile states and you bring them into an international system that is founded on US power and infused with US values, you will eventually pacify them. Now, the hostile states recognized that opportunity straight away, and of course, they spent the next 30 years taking advantage of it.
Mm.
The West stopped investing in its defense, and worse still, we opened up our economies to the hostile states. So, what they did was they used a collection of economic tools, including bribery, extortion, theft, sabotage, and a whole cauldron of manipulative market practices to nest themselves inside our systems and to attack us from the inside. And so they've been attacking us from inside our own economic systems for some 30 years at this point. And the tactics are pretty extensive, everything from malign research collaborations to forced joint ventures, IP theft, currency manipulation, you name it, they're on it. And we are beginning to see the consequences of our failure to address that warfare.
And even in the case of Canada, political interference in our electoral system.
Well, absolutely. On top of the tactics that they use economically, they're actually reinforced by an entire basket of hostile activities. And that includes, as you mentioned, political interference, absolutely. But it's also reinforced with good old espionage, daily cyber attacks, spurious lawsuits, and a whole regime
Mm.
of I would say, really abusive administrative and regulatory practices for Canadian firms that try to operate in China.
Really, I don't want to be too dramatic about it, but the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meetings with all of these authoritarian leaders in the past few days, plus the military parade. China is not hiding their intentions under a bushel here. Is it now patently evident that we're in an adversarial relationship?
Absolutely. For people in the security and defense community, it's been patently evident for at least a decade.
Mm.
And they've been sending up the warnings, as have the military leaders, for a number of years. There's a host of reasons why Western governments have chosen, I would say, not to address the problem head on. But in doing that, they've allowed themselves to get into an even worse situation. The longer we've been under attack, the weaker we've become. And China has effectively eroded both our capability to defend ourselves and our will to defend
Mm.
ourselves.
Mm.
And so their philosophy of conflict, of course, is ideally they'd like to win without fighting. So,
Mm.
how do you do that? You erode the enemy's capability to fight and their will to fight. And that's what economic warfare is about.
In the case of Canada, I remember even a decade and a half ago, they started to acquire Canadian companies involved in natural resources. Is that part of it as well?
Absolutely. When you think about what the economic warfare is designed to do, principally, it's got several functions, but principally it's to amass the economic and military power it needs in order to stop the US from holding it in check. And so there are a number of implications that have come out of their warfare. One has been, for sure, how they've impacted our military capabilities. I would say they've impacted us indirectly in the first instance by virtue of the fact that their ill-gotten profits have amounted to trillions of dollars, I imagine, at this point, that they have been able to pour into their military machine.
Mm.
But more directly and more concerning is what it does to our ability to drive up the capabilities we need. So,
Right.
for example, China has made itself into the manufacturing hub of the world.
Raquel, this is an important point. We're just going to take another brief break.
Okay.
We'll jump into that right after these messages.